Alright guys, so a lot of people have asked me to do a CO2 video for a very long time, and I put it off mostly because I don't use CO2 that often, but I happen to be setting up CO2 today anyway, and so I've got the parts available. The first thing you're going to need is a regulator. This is a used one, this is an Aquatech one. They're cheap, you can buy them on Amazon, you can buy them in my store usually. You've got two gauges. One's going to tell you how much pressure is in the tank, so how much gas is left. And then one is going to tell you how much pressure is going to go through that line. And this is the knob right here to adjust it. So if it was way out, there's going to be almost no pressure going through. And if you cranked it really far down, it'd be letting out a ton of pressure. The reason why we put on a regulator is because if we just open this, it lets out way too much CO2 too fast. Like that obviously would drain in like a minute, right? So we have to put the regulator, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to regulate the pressure so that it comes out one bubble at a time as opposed to all that we just let out. Now, when it comes to hooking up your regulator to your CO2 tank, a couple of things. First, let it get to room temperature. So a lot of times you're going to go to like a central welding or something like that, and you're going to swap the tank. And they're going to go grab one outside, they're going to hand it to you, you're going to drive home, you get home, and you want to set it up. Well, if the metal's really hot or really cold, it's going to expand or contract. And so we'll tighten this regulator on there and we'll get it on super tight, but then tomorrow we'll come in and we'll have no CO2 left because when it got to the right temperature, the threads changed and all of a sudden this is really loose. And so you gotta let it acclimate to the temperature of the room. I do it for at least 3 or 4 hours. I don't know what the soonest time is, but you know, do it earlier in the day, go do all your errands, eat dinner, then come back and do this project. So we need to hook our regulator up. This regulator also has a solenoid on it. What does that mean? That means we have a plug-in. And if we were to plug this in, when it has power, it will let CO2 out. When it doesn't have power, it won't. So we get to plug this into our lighting timer, and when the lights are on, it'll allow CO2 to flow. When the lights are off, it will not. And that's good because plants can only utilize CO2 when it has light. So the first thing you want to do is, you know, kind of mate this up a little bit and get it so that it, you know, goes right where that rubber grommet's going to be. And then you're going to slide this nut onto here, and if you need to hold it. If you just let it do it itself, it's really hard to turn, right? So you have to hold it level. And you get it basically finger tight. And I always have it looking up at me a little bit. So then I can grab a crescent wrench. And this is a tool I recommend. If you use like vice grips or pliers, you're going to mar this up a whole bunch. But you just get it on there, and then you kind of hold it a little bit and tighten it down. And you don't got to crank it on crazy tight, but don't leave it way loose either. Like you don't want to just like, you know, put all your weight on it. But definitely, you know, make it be pretty snug. Down here we have what's called the needle valve. And a needle valve is a very fine adjustment valve. So you might have to turn it 5 times to get it to do 5 bubbles per second as opposed to 1 bubble per second. Whereas like this adjustment might be the difference between 500 and 50. You know, so 50 and then you crank it down, that's 500. So this is the operating pressure. So we've got CO2 in here. We're going to regulate how it comes out. And so we can do this right here. So we're going to open this valve. We're going to watch these gauges move. So we can see here we have about 1,000 PSI inside the tank. That means it's a full tank. And as that gets lower, you'll know we're getting closer to needing to refill it. A 10-gallon tank on maybe, or a 10-pound tank on a 75-gallon tank might last you 2 years, depending on how much CO2 you're putting in. So pretty inexpensive, costs you 15 to 20 bucks to refill one. And then over here we have the operating pressure. And you can crank this up a whole bunch. But the problem is, like if I keep this at 100, it's gonna blow off the diffuser. It's literally just gonna go boom. So we need to keep I usually run operating pressure down around 40 or so, which I might have to let some of this out for it to, yeah. So now that I cranked it up, I have to actually add power to it for it to go back down. But I like to run it about 40 PSI. This application, since we're gonna be above the sump that I'm installing it, I don't have to do this step, but I recommend doing a check valve. And yes, I just use a normal plastic one. Typically I get 10 plus years without it failing. You could buy an expensive brass one and maybe it's gonna last you the rest of your life, but for $2 or $3 and it lasting 10 years, I think that's pretty good. I'm much more likely to break this thing or sell it or get rid of it, something like that, before this ever gives way on me. The goal with the check valve is that it would be right at your water line. So if we're doing this sump, it would be right here, so that water would only ever come back to here, where if I had it on, let's say this tank over here, if I had it on this tank and we didn't put the check valve at the water line, instead we put it all the way down here, when the power goes out, which is going to be every night when the light goes out, water is going to fill this tube. Then the pressure would have to build up, and it might take an hour before it finally gets all the water back out of the tube. And the first hour every day, there'd be no CO2 in the system. So simply put it relatively close to the top, prevent as much water as you can from coming back into it, and you'll be a lot happier. And the last thing that I use is a CO2 diffuser. Now this just goes right on the end. And this is a real simple one. You can get reactors and stuff like that. We'll talk about that in a minute. But all we're going to do is we're going to put that on the end. I'm actually going to cut this because we had it on a different CO2 diffuser. I'm going to cut and make sure it's a snug fit. But fine mists of CO2 are going to come out of this, and that's what's going to add CO2 to our system. Alright, so it's been a couple of days. We had to go out of town, but the CO2 diffuser itself, usually you want to let them soak, and I wasn't getting good action to show you guys until it soaked. So now I've got it turned up quite a bit because we're doing a lot of CO2 for, basically about 1,000 gallons of water here. But you can see all the fine bubbles coming out of it, and we're actually going to put it so it's more in this, so we can really get good diffusion going through the entire thing. Now I wouldn't normally necessarily do that if I was at home, but on such a big system that makes some sense for us. But yeah, once you got the diffuser going, and you can get basically all the plants starting to pearl, which we've already got going on. You can see here all the plants are nice and happy. So yeah, that's how I do CO2. Works out pretty well. And let us know if you have any questions in the comments.
Do yourself a favor, hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications. You need more videos like this in your life. We bring them to you every week from all around the world.